Good morning, Patrick.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good. We're here today with a very timely topic, actually, because the Appraisal Foundation has just this month issued a new advisory opinion, and they have it open for public comment, and the public comment is going to close pretty soon. So that's why we're recording this now. We want to get it out when people can still learn about it and go submit their public comment if they feel inclined to do so. And so, first of all, I'm going to just kind of explain what an advisory opinion is because it's something that comes out of the Appraisal Foundation that is separate from USPAP. There's USPAP, which is the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, which is our kind of guiding regulatory document of the bare minimum for what we as professional appraisers who are USPAP compliant are, required to do for in our appraisal reports. But the advisory opinions are separate from USPAP, and they're something that is a tool that the Appraisal Foundation has where they can respond and kind of issue guidance in more time sensitive topics. And it exists independent of USPAP, but they work together as related tools. And so there's brand new advisory opinion 41, that has just been released, the first draft, about use of technology in your appraisal practice. And specifically, it's talking about AI, which I'm so happy they released this because there really needs to be some guidance for appraisers about it. And they have it's posted on their website. We'll have the link so anybody watching this can check it out. But they are proposing to retire some old advisory opinions that also spoke to the use of technology in appraising, but like 20 years ago technology, and then replace it with this, which is much more current and up to date in terms of the state of the field as it is now. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah. So as Sarah mentioned, it's AO 41. The ASB is inviting feedback due by, I believe, February 2nd. I think that's a Monday. And it's interesting. Yeah. So the advisory opinions come out periodically, and they do this system. They put these exposure drafts, and you can read them and respond and offer a comment if you like. And then they take that public comment into account, in the final versions that gets published and sort of distributed as part of the support material that goes along with USPAP. It's not part of USPAP itself, but it interprets, you know, the its application. The interesting thing about this, yeah, as Sarah mentioned, that they're phasing out this AO 41 would rep- basically obsolesce two previous advisory opinions that were actually more specific, and they're about the use of specific technology. This one is actually even though that this is prompted by AI, and we all know that. The way that they're talking about this one is that it's just the use of technology in general. So that to me is an interesting way to approach the issue. They're looking at it that way, um, and I mean, I think having read through this, not extremely closely. There's more here. Uh, I don't know. I think they did a pretty good job of like addressing like a lot of the issues, and really the sort of rationale that they're highlighting here in terms of why do we need this? It's because well, as an appraisal. So this is from their rationale, which is not part of the advisory opinion proper draft. But they're saying appraisers need to continuously educate themselves, which we know is true. That's there's a need for continuing education in both methodology and techniques, but also in like subject matter connoisseurship. And they're saying that that's also applies to technology. Technology changes, and we have to continually educate ourselves about new technologies as well, which we know. People of our generation know this. We're or anyone living knows this. I'm of the generation that saw, home computing become a thing like in the 90s and internet, et cetera. And, I graduated college in 2003, and I had to type some papers, but I never had to use email once in my entire, like, I started an email account when I went on a trip abroad, and never had to use it for class. Um, And now, of course, 20 years later, or more than that, it's totally different situation. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that in the rationale, they're trying to say there's always a need to be educating ourselves and evolving. But when there's this new technology that's on the scene, it's causing us to wonder, can we use this and remain USPAP compliant? And I feel like that's the angle that they're
Yes.
looking at this whole issue from. Can you use a tool? How can you use certain types of tools and remain USPAP compliant? Um, and they're explicitly saying that this doesn't apply to only AI. This applies to technology in general. And they're looking at in the rationale. They're sort of highlighting these 4 points that that they're sort of looking at this issue from. The one, what's the appraiser's responsibilities, right? According to USPAP, what's the risks of using these new tools or any tool in general? What's the risk? What's the sort of implications for public trust in the appraisal process, which is sort of the key thing that USPAP and the Appraisal Foundation are, always keeping at forefront. And any additional issues that come up. They're looking for our comments on any of that. And again, we'll have all the links in the descriptions here. Um, yeah, Sarah, did you want to t take anything on or make any comments before we move on? Or
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I think this is really deeply needed. This is in the appraisal field, there have been a lot of conversations in the past few years as AI in particular has emerged and evolved about, what are the best practices, how to do this in a USPAP compliant way if people are going to use it in a USPAP compliant way. Some appraisers don't use AI at all. We published an article with our personal philosophy on the website last year. So it's something that is there's a lot of confusion about best practices, so I'm really glad they've issued this advisory opinion. And they are very comprehensive. It's quite long. It's like 16 pages long, going through both, as you mentioned, technology in general, and then also AI. And it's written in a way that their guidance applies to all things that are technology that are not AI as well as AI, and then takes them kind of point by point with competency, record keeping, ethics. And it's extremely comprehensive. I'm glad that this has happened.
absolutely, yeah. And I like this whole move that they're doing to address technology in general is interesting because the first thing it brings to mind in my mind is that it's not possible to avoid technology. You know what I mean? There's different types of technology that we can choose or not choose to use. But, in the modern age, there's lots of technology that we have no choice. Like everything is like so based on it. Even like this will probably be cut out of the final version, but even something like as old and ancient as agriculture is a type of technology. I think in certain types of, look at in the way that you look at the world, these are techniques, they take time, they're processes that are developed and they're repeatable and they're, anyway, so that's kind of the position I'm coming from, that it's not possible to avoid technology. So I appreciate the guidance. And then certain types, as they're mentioning, it can really raises a lot of questions about going back to other parts of USPEP, like the scope of work and the confidentiality that are all part of different rules that USPEP is kind of outlining. Um, and I'm just looking here, so for example, it's the appraiser's responsibility to decide in the first place whether or not to use um, specific types of technology. And there's a way they're introducing this idea that you need to evaluate the tool before you use it, or you need to understand the tool a bit before you use it. So I appreciate them putting that out there.
Yes.
Um, and they're providing guidance on when the use of the tool is needs to be disclosed. And that seems to hinge as we go through, that seems to hinge on this idea of transparency. Like if it's very transparent how technology works, I use computer. I press the button for the letter H, and H appears on the screen. That's a really tight, controlled scenario. But there's other scenarios where you ask an interface a question and it gives you an answer. You don't know how it produced the answer. So that's what they're hinting at with this transparency thing. Um, and they also, so it's very easy to think of this sort of chat GPT or this interface with like a AI informed like chatbot type of scenario, which is really where I see. I mean, that's the piece that seems to me like it would need to be addressed. Um, and there's well, and on that, not to get too distracted and go off on a tangent or anything, but it just occurred to me, it just popped in my head. Like I'm pretty sure I've seen appraisals that have extensively used AI and not disclosed it. Like I'm pretty
Yes.
sure, and they were terrible. And you and the idea, just because this new technology is in the air, I have to admit that question is always I'm always, this is getting away from what we're talking about at the second, but I'm always wondering if I see, a new video online, or if I see like a little brief description of something, or I'm always wondering, is any of this AI? Like, it's just like a question that itself is kind of like that's the main, AI doesn't just has to exist to make these problems. It doesn't even have to actually do very much. It just needs to have us asking these questions. Um,
And it undermines the public trust because you can't trust anymore that what you're seeing is real. And then even when you try to cross-reference and verify and find it with another source, well, is that also AI generated? We've really taken a big hit in our ability to do independent, verifiable research.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And the uh well, before we jump in, the other thing that I really appreciate is they talk about how to document in the work file.
Yes.
Um which sounds pretty the thing I like about all this is that, it's realizing that it's like a huge responsibility to choose to use this stuff, because you think you're making your life easier, if you even just documenting the use of this stuff in the proper way, it's actually you're not saving any time. That's one takeaway, right? Because if you're putting prompts into a chat box, that's the kind of thing that they want you to document in your work file, like what you're asking and what's coming out. And that alone, just like those extra steps, that's just like I'm just that to me is already becoming not feasible in terms of efficiency. I'm like, I don't want to deal with
Yeah,
that.
and it takes longer. I had the same thought reading through this. I've had this thought even before this that so many of the time savings, if you are a trained connoisseur, it's faster to do it yourself. And then they do briefly reference the issue that AI can hallucinate and invent things. And I think that is another big, big, big time investment in terms of the responsibility of the appraiser to then verify whatever gets generated from generative AI. Say they come out and it spits out in a personal property, context. Okay, this painting, you know, this is a number. This painting, is available for this much. Well, where? How? Is the gallery going to verify that to you? Maybe, maybe not. You're still going to have to go verify it to double check that and make sure it's not hallucination. It doesn't save any time. It creates more problems in many instances.
I agree. Yeah, when that's jumping ahead, like after reading all this new guidance and talking to, or I guess hearing from appraisers that do use AI like pretty regularly, and in responsible ways. Like that's one of my takeaways. It's that it's actually it's a lot of extra work. It's not like this time saving magic necessarily that I think gets underlined in the sort of commercial propagation of AI, application. That's its selling point. That it's like this time saver. But then seeing how appraisers use it and seeing this guidance, that I think that's definitely not true in the substance of what an appraiser does,
Mhm.
personally.
And
Um, yeah.
something else I really appreciated that they spoke to repeatedly in the guidance is it's the appraiser's responsibility to then have their own analysis of whatever information they
Right. Yeah.
that's information. Those aren't assignment results. It's what the appraiser does with it or doesn't do with it. They may say this is garbage and discard it, but they still have to document that in the work file. That
Sure, sure.
that process, the synthesis, their own critical thinking and scholarly analysis and connoisseurship, that's the part that's still their job. And so I really appreciated how in this advisory opinion, they were very explicit that you can't just take whatever AI spits out, paste it in your report, and call it done.
Yeah, they're very clear that what a tool does, it's by definition cannot be USPAP compliant. What a tool does, the only thing that will make something USPAP compliant, that's solely an appraiser's responsibility, right? So the non-sentient tool cannot comply with anything. It's only an appraiser. And when there's no sort of human filter, that it's actually, I feel like we could even extrapolate from this that they're pretty much saying that when there's no human filter, it's not even an appraisal, um, per se.
Yeah,
Uh,
I got that takeaway too.
let alone use PAP compliant, because it's not, yeah, if there's no human filter, there's no way things can be credible. If there's not some kind of analysis going on.
I also appreciated how they gave very specific examples of old school technology use to kind of counteract what, these new evolving forms like the use of spreadsheets. Like it's very common for appraisers to use an Excel spreadsheet with the sum formula in to double check themselves to add up the total appraised values for a report with multiple items, just so that there's a clear way with a formula that's also you can document it, can go in the work file. You can see exactly what you did to arrive at, okay, these 20 things we appraised, this is the total of it. And they talk about spreadsheets with formulas that the appraiser inputs themselves. That yeah, it's use of technology, but that doesn't necessarily fall into the disclosing requirement, saying I used an Excel spreadsheet to add this up. That's just because the appraiser has full control over that process and they know exactly how everything got there. They put in the formula, they put in the data. And if it's wrong, well, that's the appraiser's fault. Whereas if something comes out of an output that's generative, where there's no transparency of how that happened and the appraiser can't track it, that goes into the disclosure responsibility.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. That was the interesting part. Yeah, and one sort of, there's a lot of interesting things going on here, and I appreciate them summing it all up in one place. Like one sort of takeaway, when you think about when they're talking about what the appraiser's responsibility is, one reason they're leaving that human element in place, or not that it's a decision, that they're sort of framing this as not an assignment result without the sort of human filter. Um, it's because the human part, which we normally think of as fallible, subjective, we're saying now that the human part, this is what ensures the impartiality and the objectivity. It's not the technology, because the technology is inherently capable of violating like ethics rule, confidentiality rule, and all that stuff. And bias, like just based on whatever an AI technology is trained on or something. But anyway, I thought that was interesting. They draw that out in the appraiser's responsibility section. They bullet point technology that obviously tools assist with research, but then this sort of guarantor of impartiality, objectivity, um, and just following the ethics rule in general is not possible until there's that human element, actually, the appraiser, which I don't know. I just appreciated that, seeing that, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that speaks to a takeaway I had reading through it too, that, there's been a lot of this, oh, is, the appraiser going to exist in the future? And they're saying a defiant yes, because we are needed to provide that USPAP compliancy. These other things, yeah, they're tools, they're technology. They are not creating appraisal reports. That is our job, and it will forever be our job.